never, ever marks the spot, except when it does. What's up, Story Geeks? Welcome to the Story Geeks Show, where we dig deeper into popular stories to discover how they've impacted our lives. We're still in the midst of all of our Indiana Jones content, and today we're talking about The Last Crusade. And I have the pleasure of having a screenwriter who is also a fantastic resource for understanding the industry as a whole, Kamran Pasha. Welcome to the Story Geek Show, part of the Orange Grove 55 Network.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted and honored to be here. I want to thank you, Jay, for inviting me on. I want to thank you, my old Patreon, Twitter, Instagram friend, Alia, for inviting me. She connected us to it, and I'm delighted she's gonna share her very deep perspectives on this film with me, and it's gonna be great. We're gonna have fun.
Yes. And I'm so glad to have you, Cameron, and I'm also so glad to have AliaaAloha, because we don't normally get Alia on this show. Normally she likes to stick to talking about the box office and what's happening with the industry. She has a wealth of knowledge on that topic, and so we're very happy to have her here as well. So thank you both for joining me. This will be a really fun
part of the journey of Hollywood is taking risks and doing things you're not comfortable with. That's what we're doing here today, right, Alia? We're doing it. We're trying to do things.
I mean, I just tend to be easygoing. I'm just like, oh, I like that. I like that. I like everything. I like that. So, because I'm not a creative storyteller, so I felt uncomfortable with this. But
now you've just
pointed out that yes, I am yourself. I'm Middle Eastern.
We're going to talk about this movie. This movie is about escaping your limitations of yourself and your definitions of yourself. That's part of the theme of it. And so it's great that you limited yourself. We're going to teach you to escape it now.
So I'm prepared. Usually for these streams, I'll have my headset on, microphone ready. So yeah, this is how last second this was. I am like using just the computer stuff.
I'll put on like this. So I can fire you with like electronics, whatever. So it's okay.
That's awesome. Well, it was a pleasure to have you both. Let's jump in with a pretty simple question. And because neither of you have been on one of these shows before, we've done a show on Raiders, we've done a show on Temple, this is our Last Crusade show. I'd love to hear not only your scale of 1 to 10 rating of The Last Crusade, but I'd love to hear what's your Raiders score, what's your Temple score, what's your Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. If you've seen Dial of Destiny, what do you give that? Kamran, why don't you start us out?
Well, I mean, I will say that I love this trilogy. This is the true Indiana Jones trilogy. I have my own subjective judgments on how you rate them. Personally, I would rate the very first movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, at a 10. I mean, I think it's an absolutely perfect movie, right? And if that was the only thing I ever saw of Indiana Jones, it would still be a good movie 100 years from now, right? And so I would give that a 10. I would then do its follow-up, which actually was not a sequel. It was actually a prequel. In the timeline, it was set in the past of the Temple of Doom. I'd actually give that an 8. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I don't think it rises up to the level of the first movie, but I think that The Last Crusade comes very close to the first movie, so I would give it a 9. So I would say 10, 8, 9, and then anything after that to me is just fan fiction.
I like that. Alia, what would you say? What are your ranking of these films?
Well, I was years old when I found out that Temple of Doom chronologically was before Raiders. I was like, what?
Most people don't realize that.
But then it makes me feel better as far as with Marion, because at first I was like, wow, you forgot Marion so quickly. But then when you realize that Temple of Doom actually chronologically came before, even though yes, he and Marion had a past, it's not as, wait a second.
The truth is, he forgets Marion pretty quickly. He's off with the Nazi chick in this one. So
it was years later. Okay. That is the redemptive thing of Crystal Skull. I'll say that in some ways. But okay, being that I'm easygoing and like everything, I'll just look at this as I'm on Disney Plus and not in the mood to watch release order, chronological order. I just want to pick something and watch it. Which one would I push play on? It would be Raiders. That's like the top. Crusade, second. Mm-hmm. Then it would be depending on my mood, between Temple of Doom and Dial of Destiny, and then Crystal Skull last. I would say really the only kind of redemptive quality to Crystal Skull is Marion. I love that character. And then also, I don't know, it's kind of nerdy cool to kind of, I don't know, see the village, the neighborhood that the Defense Department set up to destroy with the nuclear bomb. I kind of like nerdy like seeing
that was actually cool. Like, there were some cool moments.
Yeah.
Although, him escaping the atomic blast in the refrigerator.
That was
gonna work. Probably not gonna work.
No, don't try it out at home, people.
Yeah.
And then now with Oppenheimer around the corner, there's parts of it with the recent rewatch that kind of jumped out. So that was kind of intriguing just based on what's happening with other studios and other productions and releases.
Yeah. Just to give you guys some context, most of the people that listen to this show already know this, but I'm right there with you guys. Raiders is a 10 out of 10. One of my favorite movie of all time. Number 2, I've got Crusade. Last Crusade is number 2 at a 9.75. I agree with you, Kamran. It's very close. It's not there, but it's close. I have Temple at a 9. And this is my favorite franchise, so what can I say? And then I have Crystal Skull at a 6.5, which is probably fairly generous. There's some things I really like about it. There's some things, we could go on and on about this.
Well, we'll talk about why I don't think that's an Indiana Jones movie. We'll talk about
perfect.
Okay,
perfect. Yeah. And then I have Dial of Destiny. I actually have right now at an 8 or an 8.5. I quite liked it, given the constraints associated with it. And I need to rewatch it. I've only seen it the one.
You're not the only one. I mean, I think their narrative has gotten out that it's a bad movie. I'm not hearing that. I mean, some of my friend Stephanie Janisek, she really liked it, right? She's like, look, it's not as good as this one and that one, but it was an enjoyable movie for her. So I don't think it's a fair narrative to say, it's not succeeding at the box office, certainly not at the level they wanted, but it's not a fair narrative to say it's a bad movie. I haven't seen it yet. So, but from the variety of opinions I've heard where people actually just objectively looking at his movie, a lot of people liked it.
Yeah, I think you have to. We talked to Disney George and I talked about it yesterday, actually, when you gave our spoiler review of it. And I think you have to watch it within a specific context. It is sort of a swan song for Harrison Ford, and it is not Steven Spielberg. And if you watch it with that frame of reference, I think you'll like it. If you really can't get past those two things, you'll probably have a hard time with it. So it just depends on kind of what frame of reference you put yourself in. Now, Last Crusade starts out where we actually travel back in time at the beginning of this film. Before we don't meet Indy, when he's in his 30s or 40s. We meet him when he's a teenager, and we see him as a kid, played here by River Phoenix. We've talked about how amazing that the Raiders and the Temple opening sequences are on previous shows. So, what are your thoughts on the opening sequence of Crusade?
Well, it is a different style opening, right? Because and the great thing is that there's a surprise in every opening, which pulls you in, right? The surprise of the giant boulder and all of that in the first movie, all those things. Here, the surprise is that it's young Indiana Jones, right? It's River Phoenix, right? And they do a little fake out where they have the fedora guy, and he's got a nice chiseled jaw where you think it's actually Harrison Ford, right? And then you pan up and realize Indiana. The little kid is talking to one of the kids from the troop that's in the cave, and that's River Phoenix. And and this is such a wonderful performance by River Phoenix. I can see him as young Harrison Ford at that age, and he captures it, and it is a great loss to all of us that he died so young. Is that this guy had such incredible raw talent and charisma, and we've all been deprived of what he could have done afterwards. Joaquin, his brother, lost a brother, and we lost an artist. But we see this, and so it was a different take. But what I enjoyed about it was showing. It gave you some insight into Indy's character that we haven't seen before. You see his young idealism. This belongs in a museum, right? He's a righteous person. He sees these people looting this treasure of Coronado, and as a young kid, as a young teenager, he has to just that. And you see elements of how initially he's not scared of snakes, and then he gets thrown into a train full of snakes, and that changes that. So that I think was helpful to understand the person he's going to become, right? And so it is different in style, but that's the surprise, is now you're finally getting some deeper character into Indiana in a way that you care.
Yeah. And you know what? It's one of those sequences too where there's a lot of content out there. Even the Solo movie was kind of this entirely, where you put out a creative piece of work that fills in the backstory of your main character. And a lot of times that doesn't sit real well, or it feels completely like fan service. But in this short sequence, there's a lot of things that happen that tie into his later character, as you're talking about.
And you even see how he gets his hat. You even see
exactly.
Yeah.
They went even so far is because Harrison Ford has that scar on his chin. They even gave him this when he does the whip and hits himself. And they even gave him that. It was so. But I think here the reason why it works is because the sense that Steven Spielberg has of this whimsical, fun adventure, and then we fill in the gaps. It just kind of works because it's all treated as if it's serious enough, but there's also enough levity to it that it draws us in, and we just kind of go, "Oh, that's kind of fun. Oh, that's kind of fun," and we just keep going with it the whole time, which I think is awesome. Alia, what did you think? What did you think of this sequence in this opening?
I mean, I enjoy it. I like it, but then my overthinking brain, because I'm aware of so my overthinking brain, it overwhelmed me when I heard then about the young Indiana Jones adventures, and I didn't know how they fit together, because River Phoenix is not a young Indiana Jones.
So did you see that television series? I watched it as a child. Alia, did you see that series? Have you ever watched the Young Indiana Jones show?
If I did, I don't remember it, but I think to me, and even still, just because of my Virgo overthinking brain, it like overwhelms me because it's two different actors, and I'm like, how does it fit in the timeline? And I feel like I'm breaking down. I'm AI there or something. So I have to kind of like just be really like let it flow over me and just watch it, but just not think too much about it, because meanwhile I'm aware of this series and I don't know how they fit together, and then I'm like, okay, Harrison Ford. Now here we go, rock and roll.
Yeah, I will say this about River Phoenix. I remember as a kid, because this movie.
I will start watching it though. I am intrigued, but it is.
We'll talk about it in a second. Let's get to Jason. I want to talk about that because it is in some ways connected to this movie. So
okay.
Yeah, that's true. River Phoenix to me, when I was a kid, was kind of like the pretty boy who, as a kid, I could not see as Indiana Jones. But now when I watch it, I go, this kid nailed it. Like the way he says things, the way he, like, it belongs in a museum and all. He nails Harrison Ford in a way that I think is pretty remarkable. So so let's talk about Young Indiana Jones. I've been watching some of them. I'm trying to catch up. There's so many things to watch right now. It's impossible. But yeah, talk to us about how the Young Indiana Jones adventures fit into this portion of the film.
So the original show that I saw many decades ago was great because I believe it was filmed about it was early 90s, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. Okay. 92, 93 is when they came out.
Exactly. So it was Sean Patrick Flannery was Indiana Jones, right?
That's right. Yep.
Right. Okay. So and he was great in that. But what was interesting about it is that most of the episodes were bookended with an old Indiana Jones telling the story to a little child in a museum, and you see him as a very old man, way past where even Harrison Ford is today at this age. You see him as a grizzled old look. He looks like he's in his 90s. He's this little gnome of a man. He's got a patch because he's lost one eye by then. He's got a scar, and he's this little old man wandering around this old museum, which is probably where he put many of the things of his adventures. And there's a little child that sees things in the museum, and he takes this kid on in his lap and tells him, "I'm going to tell you a story about this piece here, right?" And then you flash back to 1925, right, when he was and then you have him, and he's at this point he's a young man in his 20s around, right?
Yeah, I mean, the series starts with him as an 8-year-old, but the series when it came out originally, the series was scattered. It'd be like, here's an episode where he's 8, or here's
it was not linear. It was not linear.
Now on Disney Plus, when you watch it, it's in chronological order of his life, so it's kind of different. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but what was great is that it captured, it shows you, it set up the idea that this character came from somewhere. This character was an adventurer from the beginning. If I remember the pilot episode when I saw it, I must have been in senior year in college or junior year in college at the time. I remember seeing the pilot episode, and at the time, I was delighted about the fact that that young Indy says I think he's got a love interest or whatever, and he's arguing with her, and she speaks fluent Arabic, and suddenly he talks back to her in Arabic, right? And it's just like, and she's shocked. He's like, well, that's the first language I learned, right? And so as a Muslim guy, I was like, see, they're honoring Indiana Jones, because you see him throughout the Middle East, at least in 2 movies, right? But it actually showed that he was as a young man. Because I don't recall that he went into the father, but he's obviously someone that is, even as a young man, is interested in the world, speaks multiple languages, and is an adventurer. And that feeds into when we see River Phoenix, who's actually, 12 or 13 or 14, maybe 15, supposedly, when this is something like that, right? Mid-teenish, right? And so then you get this background of, well, how did he become this young guy that could speak fluent Arabic at 20, in the 1930s or whatever, 1920s, whatever it was. And it's because, you learn that his father is this literary scholar, right? And so now some of the things that were set up in that Young Indiana Jones Chronicles are answered in this movie.
Yeah. And I encourage people to, the way that it's ordered on Disney Plus, you see him as an 8-year-old first. And so we don't get the, at least I have not seen yet the older 90-year-old. I'm actually waiting for that because I would love to see that. We don't get that character yet. But I will say that you got to kind of make it through the 8-year-old, because when he's 8, he's on a trip with his dad and his mom and his nanny and their teacher. And they're going around to all the different places in the world, really, where Henry Jones Sr., played by Sean Connery in this movie, but played by another actor in this.
Was he a Scottish character in the show? I don't recall.
Was. Yeah, he was. He's a Scottish character in the show.
All right.
And he's giving a tour where he's speaking to all of these different. He's giving lectures around the world, and so Indy's kind of tagging along. And just like you said, in every city, he learns the language. He learns how to interact with somebody. Oftentimes, he meets a local boy or girl who he interacts with to learn more about the culture. It's a pretty fascinating little show. Some of those episodes, those early episodes, can be a little slow, but once you hit the teenage into 20 years, like, it speeds up pretty well, and it's pretty exciting from that. It feels a little bit more like Indiana Jones.
Non-spoiler, Dial of Destiny missed out on giving him an eye injury.
Well, they probably forgot all about that, and my opinion. I don't think Kathleen Kennedy is aware that show existed. I'm sure she was like, I'm sure she'd be startled to learn there was such a show where he had an eye injury. I'm sure that's news to her.
That's funny. That's awesome. That's
there's Extended Universe in Star Wars? Nah.
One thing I did find interesting that you bring that up, that I found interesting about Dial of Destiny. I won't spoil anything for you since you haven't seen it yet. Mm-hmm. But unlike the Kathleen Kennedy Star Wars, which says we have these older characters, but they can't hold the film for us, so we'll introduce younger characters into this as well. It was interesting to me that they actively avoided that with Dial of Destiny. And I thought that was a really wise choice because it put so much focus on Harrison Ford and him as Indiana Jones that felt better to me. But I do think that they could have, talk about a $290 million budget, like they
minimum
sacrifice some of the younger audience, because I don't know that a lot of younger kids are going to be like, I want to see 80-year-old Harrison Ford run around, Yeah. So it's going to be, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Cameron, about like how you feel that plays out when you see the film. We'll have to...
the rumor is, and again, I've never seen the cut that's been rumored, right? The rumor is that earlier cuts, we do know it's been reshot extensively, at least for the past year, so that earlier cuts gave a lot more emphasis to his female sidekick and setting her up to be the future Indiana Jones. My understanding is that's not how this movie ends, with her as that, and that's good. I think that's a better outcome. I mean, in the last one in Crystal Skull, they were setting up that he had a son, but it didn't quite work out. With Shia LaBeouf, with a lot of his own personal issues, he wasn't in a position to really continue that character. But I think they were planning to make him the Indiana Jones 3, right? Yeah. The Indiana Jones, the third generation, and it didn't work out. And I understand that his characters at least dispatch, in this movie, and so they resolved that issue. But to me, that's kind of tragic, because you do Indiana Jones to have a legacy, right? at least the happy, Crystal Skull was not, in my opinion, a very good movie, but at least seeing Marion again, which is his love interest from the first movie, seeing her back, learning that he has a son, it ends with this sense of hope that there's a continuation to his legacy, and it's unfortunate that all those reasons combined that we don't have that in the storyline now.
Yeah, and I'm gonna skip down. This is a question I have for later, but since we're talking about endings, this film, Last Crusade, was the completion of a trilogy. So now we've seen 2 films since then. Obviously, Crystal Skull and now Dial of Destiny have come out. But what did you think of the ending of the trilogy? Like, maybe I'll start with you, Aaliyah. Where did you see this? Where did you see the ending? Was it satisfying to you? Did you want more from it? What were your feelings about the way that the Last Crusade ended?
It was satisfying. I mean, they rode off into the sunset. The adorable elderly guy at first was like falling off of the horse, and Indy had to prop him up. But they all caught up, and they rode off into the sunset. So it ended, happily ever after. And that way, he and his father got closer. He even said Indiana to get his attention when Indy was obsessed with the. Oh my goodness, I'm having a brain freeze. The cup of Christ.
Holy Grail.
Yeah, the Grail, yes.
Goblet, yes. the last one. And so it just, to me, had no loose ends. I mean, there's always that little part of me. It's not, it's my overthinking brain, but it's not deal breakers or anything. But it's like, I'd like to know more about his mom, or,
we learned she passed away. We learned she passed away in the movie, right? And that, she hid her illness from the father. So there was a tragedy there. And what I'm watching, because I watched the movie again. I hadn't watched the movie in years, and I loved the movie when it first came out. There are scenes in that movie that stayed with me forever, and I'll get to those scenes. Right, there's scenes that even if I remember everything in the plot, I remember those in scenes like the bridge, the crossing, the leap of faith, visually stayed with me forever. Right, and finding that the Grail is actually, of course, not the golden bejeweled cup, but it's going to be the simple stone cup of a poor Palestinian Galilean guy, right? That's what it would be, right? And so those things always stayed with me. But what was interesting to see is, I mean, to me, growing up in that generation, it's amusing to see the challenge of making this movie. At least maybe the last couple of years, maybe we're lightening up again. But he's let's just say he's very rakish, James Bondish with the ladies, right?
Yeah.
Really, just he doesn't get no consent when he grabs that kiss. You don't get no consent, right? But then they play with it. It's like, how dare you kiss me? And then she kisses him back even harder, right? I mean, that's the fun of these movies. And he was that from the very original. I mean, when we first meet Marion, she's like, I was just a kid. It's like, you were old enough, right? This guy's a little bit of a misogynist creep, right? But the chick kind of loved him, right? I mean, he was always played that way, right? But he had this double side because he's this guy who's obviously got, this rakish, bad boy thing with the ladies, but then he's a college professor, and that opening which they didn't exactly replicate it, but you could tell the college girls have a crush on him in this movie too. But in the first one was a genius where they're all staring at him like this, and the one of them is written "I love you" on her eyelids, right? But he's not Mr. Me Too, right? He's not going to do that with his students, right? So those are the moral limits, which is just interesting to see that from the perspective of where we are today on social issues. So.
Yeah.
Apple didn't fall far from the tree. She talks in her sleep.
I mean, think about it. The dad banged the same girl. I mean, this is crazy stuff for a family film.
That's true.
How do you know she's a Nazi? She talks in her sleep. What?
By the way, that was an improv line.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Sean Connery came up with that. They were gonna indicate later in the movie that they had both slept with her, and they realized that later in the movie, but he just came out with that line
right then.
Yeah,
Spielbergs like
the reaction was so real because they're like, what?
Exactly.
And then I like the Austrian way better. This is the Austrian way to say goodbye. This is the German way to say
Right.
But part of what makes those movies fun is that there is this fun old rakish 1920s, Errol Flynn kind of vibe to it, right? And so you just go with it. I think when we went to our moral panics in the last 10 years, right? It took the fun out of the silliness of a lot of this stuff, and the joy of the game of seduction, because he is not a Me Tooer. He's not Harvey Weinstein. He's playing games with these ladies. They're playing games with him, and it's understood. But in a world we're in right now, where everything is taken very literally and surface level, people don't see the nuances of the dynamic anymore.
Yeah, that's a really good point. This is a little bit of a deeper question, but it's related to the artifact here. The artifact in Raiders, the Ark of the Covenant, is rooted in Judaism. The Sankara stones in the temple are taken from Hinduism. And then we get the Holy Grail, which is from Christian lore that's expanded upon in Arthurian legend. What do you think about the inclusion of the Holy Grail? Does it work as a MacGuffin? Why or why not?
Well, I mean, as someone who studied religion in college, that was my major, right? And that's why people ask me, why would you major in that? Well, today, all my screenwriting comes out of my study of the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, all the great stories, because those are the best stories in the world, right? I mean, if you talk about storytelling, I mean, there are stories that are great, like Casablanca, and there are stories that create global civilizations like the Bible and the Quran, right? I mean, there are stories that the Upanishads create Hindu culture, right? I mean, there are stories that create civilizations that last thousands of years. That's storytelling, right? Which brings us, it was great that they used it, which is why my understanding is Dial of Destiny does not have a theological. I mean, it's a time travel device, right? But it isn't a divine theological thing. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it's not.
Okay.
It's not.
There's a tease at the beginning of the lance that drew the blood.
Oh, that's right.
The Spear of Destiny.
That turned out to be a fake.
Would have been about.
It's an interesting connection to then the cup. So.
Okay. Yeah, because Spear of Destiny, I actually pitched a project a while back based on a series of novels written about the soldier who had the Spear of Destiny, the Roman soldier who speared Christ, and that he was cursed to have eternal life. But it was a curse, right? That he basically couldn't die. Well, everyone he loved died, and so he would go. It's a series of novels called the Kafka novels, which were hugely popular back in the 70s or whatever. And where he becomes a soldier of fortune, and you see him like a modern day, like he's like fighting the Vietnam War, but he's actually the Roman guy, and he's lived 1,000 years, and he can't tell anybody, and he can't have real relationships because everyone he loves is going to die, right? And so this is a curse. Like he was, for spearing Jesus, he's cursed with eternal life. It's not a blessing, right? He's a lonely guy who can't ever make up for what he did. So he just goes around killing people, and that still doesn't make up for it, right? But whatever. So let's, for a second, I want to talk about the theology and linking it to the Golden Grail. It was very important that the Holy Grail be this piece here. Because you start off with the Ark of the Covenant, which is actually it's universal. At least it's Abrahamic, because it's in Judaism. It's obviously in Christianity, and it's mentioned in the Quran. The Ark of the Covenant, I believe it's called the Tabuk in the Quran. There's a verse in the Quran about how when it had been taken away from the Israelites by their enemies amongst the Canaanites, that there's a scene in the Quran where when it's returned to them, the angels come bring it to them, right? It's an actual scene in the Quran of the Ark of the Covenant. And there's Muslim stories about where the Ark is too, right? So all the Abrahamic traditions, it's very central to them, right? And so that's very universal. And then it gets all, then so let's just get out of West and go to India, which was interesting, right? And you got the Thuggis, and you've got Kali, the goddess of death and regeneration in the Hindu tradition, right? So you're like, okay, well, that's interesting. And then you make it very specific to the Holy Grail, which is, that's very specifically Christian, more so than it is the other traditions, right? But all of it is about theology. And in this movie, I finally realized that they actually explained what I always intuited about why religion was so important to the original trilogy. They explain it. They actually in the scene. This is brilliant screenwriting. In the scene where he's at University of Chicago, giving his lecture to the lovelorn students, right? He says something which explains his journey in all these movies, which he says, archaeology is about fact. It is not about truth. If you want to learn about truth, go to the philosophy department, right? Actually, what he should have said, if you want to learn about truth, go to the religion department, right? So that's his journey, is that he is an archaeologist. He sees himself as a rational person who looks for facts rather than legends and stories and fables and myths. And he is pulled in each time into legends, fables, stories, and myths, which do not support the facts as he knows them. They're bigger than the facts. So his journey in the first movie very much was about having to come, the reason that he survives the first movie is he takes the leap of faith. When he starts seeing something happening, when the arc is opening and you see the electromagnetic field, cameras are breaking, something's happening. He could just be, the fact is something is happening, but he took it to have a deeper, his journey had opened his heart to faith, and he tells Marion, close your eyes. Because he knew the fable, the legend of the ark is that if you looked upon it, right, that you would be destroyed, right? That's the story in the Bible, that if you looked upon it and you would be destroyed. That would mean he'd have to believe that story, which isn't a rational story, right? But he chooses to believe that, and that saves them. Right, the same thing with the journey, and so by the time you get to the Last Crusade, he has to come to understand all those, the journey, and that's why the vision on the bridge always stayed with me, the leap of faith, where he puts his foot out on the invisible bridge, right? And the reason it stayed with me because I've often said this, I have been working as an artist, a professional screenwriter for 22 years. I was a lawyer before this, right? I was used to making very steady, big paycheck, weekly income that you could put in an IRA and build up wealth, right? And that ended in April of 2001 when I quit that and became a screenwriter. And the last 22 years has been complete, utter instability. There's years where I've been very successful. I'd say that out of the 22 years, there's been 4 years that I've been very successful, like a lot of money, and then 18 years of scrambling. And the funny thing is the 4 years were like smack in the middle of those. So you got like 5 years of a struggle, 4 years like I made it. And then like the rest of it becomes struggle again, right? And the only way I've survived this journey and why I've stayed on it is literally this leap of faith where I'm like, all right, God, you're going to have to solve this problem, right? You're going to have to, I can't pay my rent again, and I'm just going to put my foot out into the darkness, into the void. And there's going to have to be a bridge there for me to pay next month's rent. And every time that bridge appears, literally magical check. Well, it happened last week. I'm on strike right now, so I haven't been working 2 months, right? I'm burning through my savings. And money that I needed, literally, I was like, the bill came up. I was like, crap, I got to pay this bill. I need, I got most of it, but I probably need another $500, right? And I'm not working right now. And so last Friday, I said, okay, God, stepping onto the bridge. I said, you're going to have to solve this. I got to pay this bill. You got to make the $500 appear now. I don't know how you're going to do it, but I'm going to step on this bridge like I always do. And then that was Friday, and Saturday I get a surprise check in the mail for $600 for one of those settlements. So you didn't even know you were involved in a legal settlement, right? So you were like part of this company sued this auto firm, and you were one of the claim. I was like, really? And you get to $600 as part of the settlement. I was like, okay, well, that was last week. So I'm living my entire life with that. And Indiana Jones, the only way he could take that step into the void was the other journeys he had to allow him. And now that we actually understand that the Temple of Doom was the prequel, it actually makes sense why he was willing to take the risk of believing in the biblical story, because he saw something magical happen, with the Temple of Doom. He saw, Kali Ma. He saw something happen that convinced him there is some supernatural in this world. And then that saved him. And then the culmination is the Last Crusade.
Yeah, I love the line in Raiders where they call him an expert in the occult. And if you know that he was in Temple of Doom beforehand, and there was the thuggy cult, then you go, oh, I kind of see where they're interpreting that as being okay. I got it. It's really clever the way that they pulled that off. And by the way, I love what you just said. I was listening to a Script Notes podcast. I'm sure you know Script Notes with Craig Mazin and John August.
Yeah, I know those guys.
And they were talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark, and they were talking about how Indy's character journey is from valuing things to valuing people. And I had sent them a tweet afterwards, and I said, that's 100% true, but also his journey is going from skeptic to reluctant believer as well. And
did they respond? Did they respond?
They did. They kind of said like, oh, yeah, we could see that.
Well, okay, I want to comment on that. Like, I obviously Craig Mazin, John August, are very successful screenwriters, right? Very well known. I don't know their personal theological, spiritual beliefs, right? But I will say it's the norm in Hollywood for my fellow screenwriters to be sort of like, very loud atheist types, right?
Yes.
It's kind of the norm, right? And they always kind of mock you because they're so smart. And it's weird because I'm like, well, when you write, you're obviously channeling something that it's not you, right? You didn't write that. Because writers are like, wow, I had this magical discovery. I'm like, Yeah, well, where did that magical discovery come from if the world is just the five senses as you claim to believe? They don't actually believe that. It's just the pretense of Hollywood. Oh, I'm too smart to be like these morons. Right? I mean, it's pretense, right?
Right.
But that's why people don't default to that. Notice they didn't default to that's the journey because it's a little too uncomfortable for the screenwriters.
Yeah.
I'm going to let Aaliyah speak here now. I want to hear you on all this.
Yeah, Aaliyah,
because we've talked a lot about faith and spirituality and stuff. Yeah.
Well, so with the scenes of Last Crusade when he's going through the booby traps, they were very pragmatic and practical. So there's a way he could have logically like, oh, okay, this had like pulleys and ropes, and with the leap of faith, okay, then he did the sand, but he was confronted with, and yes, he witnessed the Ark of the Covenant and all that, but I think there's that part of him that we get a little bit like his pragmatic mind would take over. But then he was confronted though with the night, the like immortal night, and you can't explain that away. So, and then the water, saves his father's life, and then the bullet like gets washed away and all that. So, yeah. But then I was like, is he immortal now?
Well, I think they made that point that this has to stay within the
to be immortal. Okay, that's what I thought.
Within the boundaries of the seal, right? So you can't leave there. That's why the knight can never leave there, right? And so the immortality is going to wear off when he walks out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought so, but then I thought, is that my headcanon? But okay, yeah, I think that was.
Yeah, but that's good screenwriting. They knew they had to answer it. Is the Indiana Jones going to drink this and is he going to live forever, right? And they had to answer is like, no. I mean, it has healing properties, right? But eternal life means you can't leave these vicinities.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up, Kamran, because and also brought up the viewpoint on storytelling and where storytelling comes from. I haven't done this yet, but I want to do a video or a podcast where I rant a little bit about people who say that all art is political, because saying all art is political is kind of like saying we put our deepest, most feelings into politics, and therefore everything that comes out must be political. And yet, I think for people of faith, all art is coming from a place of faith, not necessarily politics. Now, will it have something to say about politics? Maybe. But even if you're a person who is not a person of faith, think of how many stories have been told about the Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule has nothing to do with politics. It has everything to do with being a human being and learning how to be a human being that lives in the world. And I think too often we make stories about things that are purely political statements as opposed to a shared human experience about how we deal with the world and what that means. And a lot of times that it doesn't speak, if you just focus on the politics, you become very ethnocentric in your viewpoint because politics are different across the globe. Whereas if you go to the shared human experience, it can really break through multiple cultures to create something a lot bigger. So I find all of those things really, really interesting. So I'm sure we could have a whole other podcast.
I'm happy to talk about religion in general and storytelling and the nature of religious storytelling because I've written about it a little bit on Aaliyah, you've probably seen when I write the Pasha method article. It's a very lengthy piece I have on my Patreon. I talk about I literally use stories from the Bible and the Quran to illustrate my method of storytelling. I learned it from the scriptures of these traditions, right? And that's why my stories tend to work because of their how long these stories that have really worked.
Right, exactly. That's awesome. That's so cool. We'll have
back
on. We'll talk about.
I'm agnostic, but the spiritual parts of the movies, especially Last Crusade, were very beautiful to see. And then also with the Raiders. I wanted to say the first movie, but it's technically not the first movie.
Well, just remember, agnostic means you don't know, which is as Oscar Wilde said, skepticism is the first step of faith, right? You have to ask questions, and it is, if you look at all the spiritual teachers, their story is a crisis of faith, frankly. If you look at Buddha has a crisis of faith. He comes out of his sheltered world and sees suffering and doesn't know how to deal with it. His paradigm is shattered. And he goes to all these different things, tries all these extreme stuff until he finds enlightenment, right? Jesus has the crisis of faith. It's literally the temptations. He's he's taken into the desert and 40 days fasting, and then Satan tempts him. The only reason that story would work is if he was temptable, right? Otherwise it doesn't work, right? Otherwise there's no point to this. Like, I don't care, right? Yeah, take that. No, the whole point is Satan's offering him all this stuff because he is temptable after this period.
He wants to live. He doesn't want to die. Yeah.
And to take this cup away from me. Literally, we talk about the Holy Grail, right? We talk about the Holy Grail, the Gospel of Mark. Take this cup away from me. Yeah, I believe that's the Gospel of Mark is the only one that has that account. And to me, it's a very moving account where Jesus gets Gethsemane. It says, he's alone praying to God. He's actually kneeling. The way we Muslims pray, he prays on his face on his ground, and he says, "Please, Father, your will be done, not mine. But can you take this cup away from me? I don't want this job, right?" And so that's there. I mean, Gospel of Mark is actually, as a literary work, I'm talking about spirituality, as a literary work, I think the Gospel of Mark is the most successful. It's a gripping, incredibly well-written book. I mean, and the original Gospel ends at a cliffhanger. It ends with Mary Magdalene arriving, and the tomb is empty, and they don't know what's happened. And there's some guys like, "Oh, Jesus is gone," but they don't see Jesus, and they run away frightened. They're like, "What's happening?" And cut to black. That's a gripping storytelling, right? But and to just return to this idea of the first journey has to be doubt and self-doubt and spiritual doubt. In the Islam, the Prophet Muhammad, when he has his first spiritual experience of the angel Gabriel coming to him, he thinks he's gone crazy. He runs down the mountain, goes back to his wife, and he's telling her, "Am I possessed? I'm seeing things." And she tells him, "You are too righteous a man for God to mislead you like this." So he starts believing because his wife believes him, right? But initially he's like, "I don't know what's happening to me." That's what makes these stories so compelling, because we've all struggled with this moment. We've all struggled with faith. We've all struggled with a moment when the choice of some major new destiny of our life is presented to us, and we think, "Am I crazy to think I should do this?" And it's like me. I struggled. I have a choice. Should I go I sold a script. A guy wants to be my agent. I'm working full-time as a lawyer. Should I leave behind the secure world that I know, right? The kingdoms of the world that Satan is offering, and go into this crazy desert where I don't know what's going to happen to me, and I still don't know what's going to happen to me, right? And I chose that path, right? And it didn't automatically become like I was the right choice. Just 22 years later, I'm still like, did I make the right choice, right? And you're kind of stuck. You keep going, right? But that's why every story of faith. Moses, the same thing. Moses, he sees the burning bush. He's like, nah, I'm not. And he says to God, he's like, nah, I don't want this, right? I don't want this. And then he says to God, God says, "Go to Pharaoh." He's like, no, I got a knot in my tongue. I stutter. I'm not your guy. I'm not your guy. And God says, "Well, I'll give you your brother Aaron, right? He's going to support you." He's like, "Oh, fine," right? And so, I mean, it's literally like he resists it. Yeah. The story doesn't work without the resistance. And Indy resists the faith that is calling him. No matter how much he keeps seeing these experiences, he keeps resetting back to like a screenwriter. I just had a mystical experience, and I'm going to pretend I didn't have it.
Yeah. Exactly. That's such a good way of explaining it. That's so perfect. I love it. Take a little bit of a turn here into the relationship that Indy has with his dad, because this film focuses there quite a bit with Henry Jones Sr., who's played by the legendary Sean Connery. And it should be noted that Harrison Ford was 45 during the filming, and Sean Connery was 57. So not quite right there, but it is movie magic. We'll believe it's his dad.
Well, but the fun of that is the line where he says where Indy says to his dad, "You're old enough to be her grandfather." Well, Harrison tried to R2, and I'm okay with that.
That's right. That's a good point.
The lovely Allison Doody, who apparently, she basically she had a career for a while, and then, and she disappeared for a while, but she just came back in that Indian movie RRR. I haven't seen it, but she was apparently like one of the white people in the movie.
No way. Okay.
Cool. Yeah, she was. I'll tell you what role she had. She played what role was she? Because I have not seen the movie, but she plays somebody in the movie. Hold on, it's on her IMDb here. She plays Lady Catherine Buxton. I don't know who that was. I haven't seen the movie.
Nice.
All right, whatever.
I've only seen part of it because it was too long and I fell asleep, and I need to go back and rewatch it.
I mean, look, I'll be honest with you. I mean, when I saw her at the young age of 21, I was like, "Oh, Nazi chick, she's beautiful, Nazi chick. If you save her, if you can't save her, I will save her."
That's so true. Now, there's this age difference between these two actors. Love what you said about them making fun of that age difference, which is great. But does the relationship between the two? I have a feeling most people like this film partially because of the interplay between the two. But what does or doesn't work for you? Maybe Alia, I'll start with you. What works for you and doesn't work for you in the relationship between Indy and his father?
Oh, I haven't pondered about it on the spot. I'm like, oh, but I mean, I know the behind the scenes facts, like you were mentioning, that their age difference isn't. Sometimes that's where ignorance is bliss. It's like, I kind of wish I was really, really normie with this and didn't know this, because now that I know that there's oh my goodness, and then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, well, I see that. But I thought they had great rapport. I liked Sean Connery's American accent. He's like, I thought you were them. And it was just really cute how he kind of said elderly with that little pitch that when he hit Indy on the head, he's like, oh, I thought you were them.
He's the kind of guy, he's been living in America for many decades, so he's actually affected by it. I mean, it's actually quite effective method. I mean, Sean was a brilliant actor. I'm sure he chose that inflection on purpose.
I loved it. It was just kind of cute. It was just like this. And then he sounded like a really cute little old man. But then they did she talks in her sleep. So I'm like, whoa. But I really like the scene in the Hyperion, the balloon, when they're conversing and all that. I really like that scene. I thought they did really well together. It was, to me, perfect casting. So even though they're very close in age,
it's kind of hard to believe they got Sean Connery to come back and do that. But Kamran, what did you think? What did you think of the?
Well, what I loved about their dynamic is that, you know, it isn't where people would do it in the sort of this last 10 years of a black hole of storytelling we've been stuck in, right? Where, you know, everything's on extremes. They would have had, if this had been made 5 years ago by this current Lucasfilm, right? What they would have done was the dad would have been this, you know, broken down, angry, abused Indiana Jones, bitter, you know, and Indiana has all this pain that he has got to work out. And, you know, the reality is this is a very lighthearted relationship. There's pain there. They are, it's a normal family. The dad and the son don't really communicate. Guess what? I didn't communicate with my dad, right? You know, it's just the way it works. You know, guys don't know how to communicate with father and son, which is very hard for most of us, right? You know, and so that was very human, but it's, you know, there's that moment in again on the what is it called, the dirigible, right? You know, the Hindenburg thing, right? Yeah. You know, the big thing where he's like, all right, well, you know, you feel I wasn't there for you, son. I didn't talk to you enough. What do you want to talk about?
Let's talk.
Yeah,
and they're just looking at each other.
Hey, right? And he's like, well, then I guess we're done, right? And that's kind of a very real father-son dynamic, because he says it. I was a great dad because I gave you freedom to be yourself. I didn't hold you back, right? And look at who you've become. You're an adventurer because I gave you the freedom to have adventures. And that's not a bad argument. You know, look, my dad, God bless him. You know, he passed away. Ellie and I've talked about this. My dad passed away in 2010. And, you know, he didn't come to America from Pakistan for me to become a screenwriter. That wasn't his plan for me, right? His plan was he came here, suffered tremendously, went from being, you know, a middle-class guy in a decent situation in Pakistan, in Karachi, to coming to America where he falls to the lower class, where the standard immigrant drop, right? Where you end up struggling and taking menial jobs and doing things that you know, that aren't at the level of your master's degree or whatever, right? And just to survive so your kids would succeed. And so he was very proud when I went to law school and I got my MBA. That's what he lost. That's what he gave up his life for, right? And then I'd throw it all away to become a screenwriter, right? That wasn't his plan. That wasn't his plan for me. But God bless him. He never, I mean, every now and then he'd be like, you know, he like told himself that I wasn't doing this full time. That's the only way he could handle it, right? So I had to let him go with it. He's like, well, you know, I hope you're still working that law job while you're writing these scripts on the side. I was like, yeah, Dad, writer. I mean, he knew that wasn't true, but he had to say that because he couldn't face that his son was crazy enough to throw away a stable career for this nonsense, right? But my dad never told me don't do it. And I will tell you this: when I published 2 novels, And my first novel was dedicated to my mother, my novel on the Prophet Muhammad's wife Aisha, mother of the believers, and I dedicated to my mother. The second novel is on the Crusades. It's because Crusades are referenced in the Last Crusade, I mean the title, but right. So it's and it's about Saladin versus Richard the Lionheart, right? And I dedicated that second book to my father, and because it's a book about war, the dedication was about I dedicate this to the man that taught me the only thing that is worth fighting for is love, right? It's more it's mushy thing, right? I wrote that, and my dad, the book came out about 2 months before my dad passed away. And I remember going to people. It was in Phoenix. I remember going to Phoenix, Arizona, to see him. The last time I saw him before he passed away, because he passed away a week after I saw him. I came back home, and a week later I got a call. He passed away in his sleep. I gave him a copy of my novel and showed him the dedication to him, right? And I could see how deeply it moved him. Because I remember he wrote a letter. He was still one of those guys not doing emails. He was writing handwritten letters to his friends in Karachi. And he wrote a letter in Urdu, the native language of Pakistan, to one of his old friends saying, look how my son has published a novel and he dedicated it to me. And, I know I'm touching you, Aaliyah. You understand these feelings, right? But what I would later discover, because you always learn more about your parents after they pass, right? You learn about you learn all these stories. Like one of my dad's old friends that I didn't really know, but had known him since like he was in junior high and so I'm connected with me on Facebook. And he started sharing with these incredible adventures. My dad was Indiana Jones in his youth in Pakistan. He had a motorcycle. He was out there. This is Karachi, Pakistan in the 50s. And he's out there on a motorcycle, going on adventures. And, and he had a little rock, but he was an incredible singer. So he had a little rock band in Karachi, right? And he was an adventurer like Indiana Jones. And he sacrificed all of that, as I discovered, to come to America and work menial jobs. But in his heart, he was an artist. He was a singer. He was a musician. He was all these things. And none of that he shared with me, right? And yet it's in my DNA. So why didn't he stop me or try to stop me from doing this crazy thing I did by becoming a screenwriter? Because he was deep down inside proud that I was able to do what he couldn't do because he gave it up to come here, right? Okay. So that is the vibe of these two. The dad is proud of Indiana Jones because he gets, the dad has lived in his intellect all of his life. That's where he's safe. But his son is out there shooting up Nazis and, and doing all these incredible adventures and whipping his way through that stuff. You can see the dad is proud of his son, right? And he's proud of his son that he gets the pretty girls, and he's also proud that he could also get the pretty girls. And so, I'm a man like everyone else, right? And so that's what made that dynamic so real. And I don't know that we would have had that kind of honest dynamic in the last 10 years when it's all about like, let's deconstruct the patriarchy, right? I mean, talk about a human relationship with a father and son.
Yeah, and I don't even think that Spielberg would even go down that path, because one of the things that Spielberg is so good at, and we even saw this in The Fabelmans, is that he is able to understand the hurt that people cause each other, but also the benefit that they bring to one another as well. He's really good at capturing both sides of that equation. You can tell that, like I, as a viewer, was really frustrated with the way that his mom was portrayed, because I'm like, oh, she's doing these things to the family that are so frustrating to me. But he portrayed his mother as like, this is the person that where my creativity comes from. This is where I get a lot of the creativity that I bring into my work. I would not be Spielberg if it wasn't for my mom. And so yes, she did some things to hurt the family, but those things are balanced against what she did to benefit me personally. And I think that he does a very good job of letting human beings be human beings. And then he knows who the bad guys are too, right? So he's like, no, okay, those are the Nazis and they're bad, right? Like he does a really good job with that. So I think you're absolutely right with that. Like Spielberg and I don't know who has a writing credit on this particular film, but
there's another gentleman. I wasn't familiar with his work, but obviously there's another gentleman. He wrote this movie. Good for him.
Yeah, yeah, cool. And even George Lucas, of course, has been so influential with all these stories. So
the name that I did not see, at least on the opening credits, I was looking for. I didn't see Kathleen Kennedy. I saw Frank Marshall. I just saw it again today. She ain't scrolling on the opening credits. She's probably in the back credits. I didn't stick around to check that out. But that's interesting. George Lucas and Frank Marshall share one card, and she don't show up.
That's right.
That's interesting.
Didn't somebody say that she's one of the dancers in Temple of Doom, the opening sequence of Temple of Doom. Yeah, interesting. That's really interesting.
Apparently, you notice her because she's out of sync with the other dancers. So you notice her, right? Oh,
yeah. She's not a dancer. What's going on there?
Out of sync with everybody else. You know, sometimes it's
right.
with you.
No,
in Last Crusade, I did like it's like the little scene when they're on the motorcycle, and Indy looks at his dad all satisfied, and his dad's like, just like what happened, and Indy gets that look at his face, like almost like he's 10 years old, and like, oh, I made my dad upset. Yeah. And then they're in the beach, and you're shooting at us. It happens to me all the time. And then Indy's like ready to do some, Indiana Jones thing, but then his dad with that poem or something with the birds, and he's like with the umbrella, and so like he taught Indy something there that's not always like fighting. I really love that interaction. That's like one of my favorite parts of the Last Crusade.
Yeah. Well, that whole thing felt so real. I mean, the need that Indiana has to be acknowledged by his dad, and his dad's kind of obliviousness to that need, but at the same time, he's not an abusive dad. He's just he's in his own world. Yep. But
then his wife and then Indy's mom dying affected a lot of that too.
Exactly, so. and that always will affect how when you keep seeing your wife's eyes in his, right? Right? So yeah.
Yeah, the one line I love that comes right after that is when they've boarded the plane and Henry by mistake shoots the tail, and then he goes, "Son,
they got us.
They got us, right? He won't
lie to him.
He won't take responsibility for it because he doesn't. But that's so human. He doesn't want his son to be disappointed in him.
Exactly.
His son is an adventurer. He doesn't know how to shoot a gun. His son wouldn't make that mistake, but he doesn't want his son to look down on him. That's what's real. Exactly. It's not coming from a place of ego. It's coming from a place of I just want my son to respect me.
He's like, oh, did they get us? Oh yeah, I'm so sorry.
Perfect. I love the way that ends.
And something tells me he probably never confessed it to Indy, and it's no big deal too that he never did.
He's not going to confess it. You take that stuff with you to the grave. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But then just after that, just a little bit after that, because there's the tank sequence, which is an amazing sequence, and then the tank goes over the edge, and Henry and Sala and Marcus all think that Indy has gone over as well, and that's the one moment where Indy gets to see how much his dad really loves him because all of the barriers are broken down.
He looks over the cliff too.
Yeah. Awesome.
What's going on? But the great thing is then they go back to their dynamic where dad's like, hey, why are you sitting there? Why are you so why are you sitting relaxed? We got stuff to do. He's like, this dude just fought like 20 Nazis and saved your life. And of course he's gonna let him breathe for a second. No, the son, get up, son. Gotta go.
And the sun rolls. Yeah, I mean, then the hat rolls like in front of him. It just...
So true. That's so great. I love it.
Well, so what I want to say about the hat for a second, because there's also the fedora guy. We finally see that he gets it from this other guy, right? Mm-hmm. We doesn't even have a name. He's just the fedora guy, right? And but what's interesting is that guy's not really a villain. That guy actually kind of likes him and says and teaches him the lesson. He's like, oh, so you lost this time. Well, let that drive you. Let that push you to not lose the next time, right? And he gives him the hat, right? I mean, that's a father-son moment in a way.
Yeah.
That guy's just like a hired gun. I mean, like an anti-hero. And it just happens to be he was hired by a villainous person, as we saw them when Indy was older and on the boat. And that got taken care of years later. And then he got it back, that cross. But it was almost like, like he felt for him. Like, this guy I work for is a creep. You did your best. You're a kid. You're really awesome. And next time.
That one line that the guy says, I mean, the guy doesn't say many, the villain that's trying to get the Cross of Coronado, he doesn't say many lines, but when Indiana Jones says it belongs in the museum, and he goes, so do you. You get all you need to know about that guy has been said in that one line, right? It's just perfect. I love the way that plays out. Now, I did not know, Kamran, that you had a religious studies background, so this is a perfect question for you.
Great.
The film notes that this is a quote from the film. For the unrighteous, the cup of Christ holds never-ending damnation. And so every time I hear something like that, I have to think through like, okay, what do they mean by righteous, and what does righteousness mean in general, not only to this film and a character, but to us as viewers? So let me turn the question on to you. How does this play not only in the film, but what can we take from the film into our daily lives?
Well, I mean, again, it's more general. It's not like you have to belong to XYZ religion, right? In order to be amongst the righteous. Because Indiana Jones isn't really, his father appears to be religious, because there's a moment where he says, Jesus Christ, his father slaps him. He's like, don't blaspheme. Don't. I mean, so, and he's stuck with that. He's like, so his father is religious, whereas Indiana isn't, even though his father is going off of faith, whereas Indiana is actually seeing angels coming out of the Ark of the Covenant, right. Hindu God doing that. I mean, he's seeing this stuff, right? And he still can't quite accept what he's seeing, right? Whereas his father is going off of faith, right? Which is what Indiana has to learn. And so righteousness, at least the tone of the lesson of this film and of this series of films, seems to be righteousness is, again, about you will know them by their fruits, right? You will know them by their fruits. It goes back to those verses in the gospel where, the Good Samaritan, right? I mean, people don't understand the Good Samaritan parable. The Good Samaritan parable was quite shocking. I was actually reading a very interesting article about that in Biblical Archaeology Review, which I subscribed to a couple of days ago, right? And it's the Good Samaritan parable. A lot of Christians today don't understand how emotionally impactful it was to its initial audience when they heard it, because it is quite shocking. Because the story is, Jesus tells a parable of a guy walking from Jerusalem who gets hit by bandits and mugged and beaten and all his money taken. He's lying bleeding on the street, and a priest walks by, and the priest ignores him, right? A Levite, who is not a priest, but of the caste, of the tribal caste from which the priests come, sort of a holy caste, walks by and ignores him. And the way the story should have gone is then a common Israelite, then a common person of Judah, a poor villager from Judah comes and shows, because you think that the lesson is just about the arrogance of the hierarchical classes, right? That's not what happens. Who shows up? It's a Samaritan. And people are like, well, who's a Samaritan? The Samaritans were the enemies of the Judahites. They were the actual physical enemies of the Judahites. They fought wars. They still exist today. I've actually, I've been to Israel and Palestine. I regret I haven't been able to go to Nablus. Nablus is where they're still based. There's a few hundred of them, right? But what's fascinating about the Samaritans is that they consider themselves Israelites, and their status in Israel is very uncertain, because historically they were the enemies of Jews, but they consider themselves Israelites, and their Torah, their Bible is not the entire Bible that of the Jewish tradition and of the Christian tradition. Their sacred text is just the Torah. It's not the other books, like beyond those, like the books of the prophets and stuff like that. It's just the 5 books of Torah. And what's interesting about their book is that it's not modern Torah that we have today. Is written, the Hebrew script is not Hebrew; it's Babylonian. It was the script that was adopted. It was the Babylonian script it was the Aramaic script that was when the Judah was destroyed and Jews were taken into captivity to Babylon for 86 years or whatever. During those 3 generations, they adopted Aramaic as their language, and they started writing in Aramaic. And so the Bibles we have today, modern Hebrew, is actually Aramaic script. But the Samaritans said, well, that's blasphemy. You've changed the script of the Torah. So their Torah is still written in what is called Paleo-Hebrew, the actual Hebrew of Moses, which is a completely different script. It looks more like hieroglyphics. It's totally different, right? And so they still have it. And so when Jesus was telling the story, I'm going to bring it back to your question. When Jesus was telling the story of the Good Samaritan, that is incredibly shocking. It would be as if suddenly a Nazi shows up in the story, and the good German is the one that helps up, this poor, Jewish guy who's been beaten up, right? That's how shocking the story is, because they're at war with the Samaritans. The Maccabean kings had destroyed the Samaritan temple. They had a rival temple to the Temple of Jerusalem. They destroyed it, right? This was a physical war between 2 groups, each claiming to be the true followers of Moses, and they're still around, right? And so that's how. But the point is, why does Jesus tell that story? He has his twist. It's not about class, about the good poor Jewish guy who helps another Jewish guy. It's about a foreigner, an adversary.
Tribalism.
It's about a heretic. It's about a heretic. Someone who's a fake Jew in the eyes of the people that are of the time. And so it is shocking. I mean, this would have riled up people when they heard it, right? this would have really upset them. Like, why would you put that in the analogy, right? And then there's other stories where he goes and, and he goes and meets a Samaritan woman and he at a well, and he asks her to give him water, and she's shocked because the Jews at the time, they wouldn't ask water. It'd begin like asking a Nazi, "Can you feed me?" You would be disgracing yourself to even showing a supplication, "Please give me something to drink," from this person. And he's like, well, my message is beyond that, right? And so this is the message of the Last Crusade, which is righteousness, because even you've got the German girl who, she just happens to be born and growing up and is part of the Nazi party and in that system. But they establish she's not actually on board with the system. They have that moment where she sees the book burnings and she's a scholar, she's a historian, she's an archaeologist.
And it breaks her heart to see all that. Yeah.
Burning of books upsets her, right? And then she's the one that knowingly gives this guy. She knows that big golden cup wasn't the Grail. She's an archaeologist. She knows a carpenter in this little village ain't going to have a golden cup. He'd have a stone thing that's very small. And so, but she gives him the wrong one on purpose, right? To kill him, right? She redeems herself. It's even though she's a Nazi, she's a Samaritan. She is the good Samaritan who helps Indy and heals his father, right? That's the whole story there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really good. There's a component to this sense of righteousness is, even in the Good Samaritan parable, the first two people that passed by would have been religious leaders. And so you would assume that religious behavior would equal righteousness.
Correct.
But as you're pointing out, it's selfless behavior is what's actually considered righteous.
Do you think it was a narrative mistake then to kill Elsa? That was her name, right? Or should she have? Because she redeemed herself. Should she have lived? Or
she does redeem herself for that moment, but then you'll notice that she goes right back into the selfishness. So does Indy. But Indy gets pulled out of it by his dad. Forget about it. Yeah, but she can't break it. Indy's trying to break her, like, hey, leave the cup alone. You don't need the cup. But she focuses on, no. I need the thing because the thing matters to me more. And I think that's where I think that.
Well, and that again is the lesson, is that she has every step of life is a choice. You can redeem yourself and you can fall at any moment, right? Yep. That's the lesson. That she could have walked out of there, right? But ultimately, she didn't conquer that part of herself that still is connected to matter. Indy comes to understand it's not the item, because she's still an archaeologist. An archaeologist, she's in many ways like Belloc, right? She wants to preserve history, right? She's actually, she wants to bring the Grail out to the world, because the world should be in a museum. It should be in a museum.
But there's that rule: cannot cross the seal.
Yeah, but again, that's the thing is, he has to learn some things shouldn't be in a museum. Some things should be in here, right? Yep. And that's why you don't need the Grail. That's why you don't need it, right? Because it's the idea of the Grail, right? And so that's the lesson, and that's the complexity of it.
Yeah, that's really.
What are your feelings of the Orientalism charges against the Indiana Jones movies, Cameron? I was curious about that.
Well, they're all Orientalists. It's the time they're written in. Come on. It's like being upset that Rudolph Valentino is in The Sheik. What do you expect? What do you expect? Just look at it. Considering that they're, you've got a couple. You got Salah, the good Arab. He shows up in now 3 movies apparently, right? You got this dude, right? Even though he's not played.
There's controversy. He's not played by a Middle Eastern actor.
But again, it's Orientalism. Rudolph Valentino wasn't an Arab cheek. I have a friend of mine. You have Egyptian ancestry. I have a friend of mine, Saeed Badria, who's an Egyptian actor who's been here for decades, and he's so proud. This is his proudest thing. He was the first Arab to play an Arab terrorist before they had Greek guys doing it. So he's the first guy on the plane going, Allahu Akbar, who actually was Arab. He's like, I broke the barrier. Anybody who's sort of brownish, Italian dude, yeah, he's the Arab terrorist, right? So, right. You just gotta go with it. This Hollywood is constantly evolving and growing, and you just look at it for the time. The pivotal thing is this mean spirited? It is not mean spirited.
That's the thing to ask. I agree with you. That's the heart of it. Instead of walking on eggshells with everything.
Yeah, and look, and who's defending the Grail? It's these Middle Eastern Arab dudes, Arab Christian dudes. They're not Arab Muslims. They've got a cross tattooed on them. They're Arab,
right, or something.
Yeah, they've got the old school Templar, pre-Templar cross. But they got that, and so these are Arab Christian guys, which are frankly, and I don't want to get too political here, but it's a lot of my friends in America don't feel a lot of sympathy for Palestinians because they think they identify culturally with Israelis. I'm like, dude, you realize a lot of these guys are Christians, right? I mean, I've been to churches in Palestine, right? They're not in a good situation there, right? And a lot of people don't realize. I mean, the earliest Christians are what? They're Palestinian. This is set in.
Yeah.
It's set in a fictional Arab country, but it's Jordan. I mean, they're in Petra, right? And so Jordan.
Petra's where it was filmed.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this is the earliest Christians. The earliest Christians were Palestinian Christians, right? The earliest ones were, right? They were Galileans, right? And in fact, many people say that there are people that claim that a lot of the Galileans, scholars say today, a lot of the Galileans weren't ethnically Jewish. They had converted to Judaism because under the Maccabees had forcibly converted everyone in the area to Judaism. It had been primarily after Alexander the Great, it was primarily first the Persians had it and then the Greeks. So Jews are a very small part of that area. And so when the Maccabees briefly took over for about 50, 60 years, they basically converted all the Gentile population to Judaism. And Galilee was Jewish by forced conversion at the time of Jesus. Most of the people Jesus knew weren't ethnically Jewish, even though if they were practicing the religion. And those are the people that very quickly became Christian. And guess what? They became Palestinians, right? And so, so that you just go with it. If you find the characters that represent good and evil. It's like saying all of this is against, are all these movies about evil Germans, right? Well, they kind of are, right? Are
they saying Germans in general are evil? No. I mean, yeah. So I see your point.
Spielberg is kind of saying that, but again, you'd have to have the knowledge to know Valkyrie, they weren't all like that, right? So whatever. But you just go with it. I've worked on projects, I've seen it. There's a lot of last 15 years, there's been a lot of really ill-intentioned, ill-will-bearing, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim stuff by people who know what they are doing. They know what they're doing. They want to create dislike for this community. That's intentional. I've worked with these people. I know their names. I've had confrontations with these people, right? I've even had lunch with some of these people who pretend to be like your friend and they betray you, right? I know these people in Hollywood, right? That's not Spielberg. And for him, if you look at what I think is his really greatest adult film, and I think he sort of lost the mojo after that, was Munich, right? Oh, yeah. I think Munich was pretty much the last story.
Oh, the Olympics, the terrorism, yeah.
And what's interesting is that it's actually, even though he's a very pro-Israeli guy, and this is a pro-Israeli narrative, but he goes out of his way for someone like him with his worldview to really attempt to show the Palestinians as human beings who are going through a bad time that might lead some of them to do something like this, right? There's that great moment between Eric Bana, who is the Mossad guy, right, and this Palestinian dude, in this apartment where they're just talking, and the Palestinian, Eric Bana just has contempt for him. He's like, yeah, what is this Palestine? There's never a Palestine. You guys are just a bunch of guys, native sitting in stone huts, right? What are you crying for? You never had a country. And that's actually the standard Zionist narrative, right? And then the Palestinian gets to make his point of view and gets to point out, and it kind of embarrasses the Eric Bana character because he doesn't have a response to it. And at the very end of the movie, he's kind of like, I'm out of this. I'm out of killing all these people. I don't want to do it anymore, right? And so because he's kind of learned and grown. So Spielberg is more sophisticated than that. And, he doesn't have that agenda. There are people with that agenda, and they're out there, and they're quite successful. But that ain't Spielberg.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. I've got two more questions for us.
Yeah, so I got about 10 minutes. I got to go. So.
Now we got 10 minutes, so we'll jump into it. Basically, what I want to know is, particularly as a screenwriter, what are some of the elements that make The Last Crusade a great story, and what can we learn as storytellers that we can incorporate into our own stories? What do we see here that really works, and maybe even some things that don't work that we could say, let's avoid those things in our stories?
Ali, you want to take a stab at that? What do you think?
Oh my goodness!
Come on, this is a viewer.
And I'm not the creative storyteller.
Please open your box, whatever.
You first. Go ahead, and then we'll think about it.
All right. So I think one of the things I noticed on watching it again today, right, having not watched it in so many years, right, was there's so many brilliant setups and payoffs, right. In the opening, when he he shows up to see where his dad is and dad's house been ransacked, you see the painting on the wall of the Templar Knight crossing the abyss by floating across the abyss while other knights. That's a setup, and it's paid off 2 hours later when he remembers that he sees the same drawing in his dad's book, and he realizes he too must take the leap that character did. So that's throughout the movie. You have setups and payoffs. You have references to this that come back to that, right? And even I think you have the symbol of the cross on the stone thing that they find, and then it's tattooed on the Arab dudes who are protecting the cross, right? Everything is painted, and that's one of the I do a lot of screenwriting consulting, and one of the biggest consistent issues I keep having to guide people on in writing is that they either set things up that you think are going to go somewhere and then never goes anywhere, or most recently I had a client, really wonderful writer, but he had this consistent pattern of things would just happen, and you realize it's a payoff without a setup. You're like, dude, I was like, where did this come from? I needed to know about this, right? You can't just have this stuff, these new people show up out of nowhere, right? You got to have introduced the idea that these people exist, like earlier in the book, right? And so set up and payoff. That's very hard for people. This movie does that perfectly.
Yeah. A really good example of that, using another Spielberg film, is Jurassic Park, because they'll tell you a lot of times in screenwriting, when we're talking about screenwriting in general, they'll tell you, don't just bring in the storm. It's supposed to be representative of like all the trouble coming. But Jurassic Park does something very interesting. It tells you from the very beginning that there's an incoming storm. And so you know that it's no longer a coincidence that the storm is there, because we expected the storm the whole time, which is why it works perfectly in that context. So that's really, really fantastic. Alia, what do you think? Is there anything else that you could say in here in this story that you think, wow, this is just really, the way they did it was great, and other writers should do it too?
Well, I mean, it seems really simple, and you touched upon it, Cameron, about the journal. The journal was consistent. They would flip through the pages. Camera would focus on it. You could see it. It was a great way of explaining things. In a way, the journal was more of the MacGuffin than...
No, he goes back. He has to get the journal. He goes back to Berlin for the journal. He's constantly putting himself in peril because of this journal.
Mm-hmm. So I think it was a great storytelling device, because yes, when the camera would focus on it and on the pages, then as the audience member, you're learning things too. And it's really easy to think that the cup was the MacGuffin or the focus, but no, it's the journal. So I like that a lot. So.
And the last thing I'll say, which I love about the storytelling, is it's old-fashioned, passionate kisses, right? You grab the girl, you kiss her passionately, and I mean, this is it takes you back to like Casablanca, right? It has that old vibe, that old time. It's a time. Casablanca is the same time period. Casablanca is like 1941, 1942, right? This is 1938, and so it has that sort of old romance. Kiss me, you fool, right? I mean, that kind of stuff, right? And that's fun because it's not even erotic. It's sensual. It's romantic, and it's fun. And we don't even have that anymore. Everything is very sexualized, or it's non-sexualized. Because now apparently we have a sexual gender, an asexual gender. I'm like, wait, so the fact you're not getting laid gives you a gender? Whatever. That's a whole other conversation. I'm a dude from another time where I'm like, oh, you're not getting laid.
I'm asexual, but I do have a gender. I'm female.
If that's the case, that's like every screenwriter I know is asexual. I mean, well, what is this, right? It's a gender. Right. I'll go with it. It's reviewers. God bless them. I'm a dude from another time. So forgive me. But I love that old timey vibe to it. And this has symbolized it.
It does have a really cool.
Well, I'm asexual just because I'm like with it all, but I am a female. I do have a gender, but I'm also not anti-romantic and anti. I love seeing romance. I love seeing things like that, and in works of fiction and movies, and it's just become too, I don't know, Puritan, I guess is the term, and some like to point to asexuals as the reason why, but I'm like, no, we're not the reason why.
My mind is blown.
People for it.
Mine is
are in relationships. It's weird.
You know what this generation needs to see? Let me see. I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna come back for a second. Hold on, I want to show you.
I don't know what he's gonna grab.
One of the things that I think
know
about
what this generation needs.
Oh,
we are living in Cinema Paradiso. So Cinema Paradiso, the classic thing of it is, it's a child who loves all these old movies, right, in theater, right? But in the old days, in the old country, like in the Muslim world, they would censor the kisses as being too sexy, right? Like we're talking the old black and white movies, like, oh, this is not for children, right? And so he's like, every time he's like watching the movie and the old black and white movie, and and you got Cary Grant coming, and then they just cut away because it's been edited for this country, it's like Italy or wherever, right? And then the final thing of the movie is that he gets to see all of the kisses at once, right? And it's just like they're all one after the other, they're all brought together, right? Unedited kisses, right, from these old classic movies. So this is what this generation needs. Cinema Paradiso.
I agree.
I would actually love to come. If you want to do a Cinema Paradiso video, let's do it.
Okay.
So let's do a Cinema Paradiso video in the future. Let's do it. I'll come back
to me. That's great to me. That sounds great to me. And that is a great place to close out this show. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you both on. Let's go ahead and tell the folks out there where they can get more information from you. I know Kamran is constantly telling us some of the things that you're posting about and what some of the wisdom you're bringing to the table, and I've benefited a lot from it. Alia has told me that you have some really awesome opinions about the writer's strike, which is phenomenal. So where can people find all of that wisdom? Where can they get that from you?
The best place is, I've got an Instagram, whatever. I mean, I don't really post a lot of stuff beyond like family pictures and stuff on there. So if you want to really get into my mind and my opinions and even actually be able to interact with you, you can DM me. Join me on the Patreon, like Alia has, right? Join me on the Patreon. It's just www.patreon.com/my name, Kamran Pasha, on the screen, right? And you'll find me, and you can join for like $5. $5 a month, whatever. And we've got a really incredible community that Ali is a very active member of. She's always because it always brightens up when she comes in and posts like her knowledge, and she's like, she finds these random tweets that change everything. It's like, are you out there? Are you like the are you the Eye of Sauron that sees everything? You're like, here's this unknown nobody who's tweeted this pivotal thing. I'm like, this guy is like 2 followers. How'd you find him? Right? She's that person, right? She's always posting on the Patreon. So come, if not for me, come to see her comments, right? But on there, I share my opinions on Hollywood, on news. I share my screenwriting methods, which have been apparently helpful to a lot of people, because I do consulting on there. You if you're a screenwriter or a novelist or just a storyteller and you want me to give you professional feedback on your work, I do that through the Patreon, and higher level members of Patreon get pretty big discounts on it. And I've had probably like a couple of dozen of consults through the Patreon just in the past few months, and people keep coming back for more. So it means obviously it's of value to them. And a few people have like published novels since they put them on the Patreon, and they're doing well. And so God bless. One of them he came on the Patreon. I did a consult for him on his script. His script was terrible. His script, he rewrote it. He did the work, and now it's out there winning festivals left and right. So
Kamran.
So, and again, I pointed him like, this is the wrong direction, go this direction, and he did the work, right? But so come there, it's on there, and yeah, and you can contact me there, and you can argue with me about Lucasfilm or whatever the hell you want to argue with me about. Be polite and whatever. Deal with me. And Aaliyah, how can we, now that we're finally together on a video screen, because it's the first time I've actually interacted with her, like face to face, because we've been talking for months by DM, months. And I wasn't sure if this is like a ChatGPT fake out. Now I'm real. I don't know, unless this whole thing is a creation of AI. I don't know.
Well, and you talked her into being on a show because she hasn't been on one of my Story Geek shows, and so it's
and you did great. You added all
Absolutely.
the insight and you built on it. So see, we've now shown you the box you put yourself in is too small.
Okay, I still kind of feel like I was like, oh, it's good. I don't know, but okay. I mean,
more than that.
So I'm pretty much on.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So tell us, how do we keep track of you?
Yeah, how do people follow you?
Pretty much on Twitter.
If you follow Alia, she's going to post some really important things about how the box office is doing, how different perspectives on what you should be paying attention to. Yeah, so where do people find you on that?
Oh, now I'm gonna have to start tweeting more. Usually I retweet, but when I'm on things like
randos that nobody's ever heard of, right? You just find them. You're like a spy.
But I'm primarily on Twitter. That's my is it reverse? Okay, here. AliaaAloha. And I know, I mean, I am on Instagram and I'm on that new thing Threads, and I can't even remember my Instagram. I am following Kamran. Kamran's following me on Instagram. But I was pretty much there. I'm pretty much there for like the people that aren't on Twitter. And then if Twitter implodes and goes the way of MySpace, then I have that Threads thing. But I'm pretty much on Twitter, and it's AliaaAloha. And now that I have done this, that means that I have to start creating more tweets instead of just retweeting.
Well, I always love Alia and I interact with in a lot of group chats and things, and it's always an absolute pleasure. So thank you both for joining me today. It was a really fun conversation. If you're watching, please comment down below. And check it out, and let us know what your thoughts on The Last Crusade are. We would love to hear them. Start some discussions down in the comments below. And we will see you on the next episode, which will be about Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which is very controversial. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I'm out of that one. You can do that one.
yeah.
I won't talk about that.
Perfect.
Fan fiction, you said.
Fan fiction, that's right. All right, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode. Bye.